Hey, good morning. I'm Danielle Strachman. This is my first live Facebook video, actually, first AMA also. Really excited to be here with all of you and want to thank the group for having me. I'm going to check to make sure that her sheet isn't sending me a message I need to see. Okay. Okay, it looks like everything's good. Harshit, is everything good on your end? You can see and hear me? Making sure everything's working. And then I'll ramble on about myself. Okay, cool. Looks like things are good. I just got a love button. Perfect. Harsh, let me know if you want any particular way for me to start. I know I can. Oh, okay, great. It looks like we have a couple people here. Awesome. I guess I'll just start talking a little bit about my history, and people are welcome to comment and ask questions at any time, since that's what you do. But yeah, I'm Danielle Strachman, currently co-founder and general partner of 1517 Fund, which my colleague Michael Gibson and I started 2.5 to 3 years ago. We started it because we wanted to scale our efforts working with younger makers. We were working with younger makers when we were on the founding team of the Thiel Fellowship. We started with that program back in 2010, and we saw some really amazing outcomes coming from young people, and we wanted to do more with them. So we started the fund 2.5 years ago to do that. We currently work with about 42 portfolio companies. We are a seed stage fund, so we work very, very early with people, really before they have a full-on product market fit, usually before they're going into pilots. And we love to work with interesting teams. We look for a lot of characteristics of people at the start because that's what we have to go off of. What we know about startups is that the thing that changes the most is the product. And ideally, the thing that changes the least is the team. So we look at a lot of characteristics like insatiable curiosity is something that we look for in people that we want to work with. We look for resilience characteristics. What do people do when things aren't going well? We like to ask, are people that we're possibly going to be working with coachable? We want to know that we can be there to provide value to them, and that we'll work with them for a long time. We really think of it as a very, very, very long-term relationship, because in venture capital, especially at the earliest stages, you might be working with a team for something like, 5 to 10 years. So actually, one of our litmus test questions is, would we want to have Thanksgiving dinner with these people? So it's not just about the business side, it is about the personal side. Are these people we want to work with for the long haul? So I guess I'll pause there for a minute and see if people have questions that they want to ask, and go from there. I guess fun fact, I love tea. I'm a very big tea drinker. I guess one thing I'll talk about while I'm waiting for some questions to come in is maybe an interesting story about one of our companies. So I talked earlier about how it's really about the team. I'll finish this story and then I'll jump into that question, and feel free to put in more questions as we go to sort of queue them up. But yeah, things are really about team at this stage. When Michael and I were first starting the fund, we went to a fund manager of a Series A group, and we said to them, are there certain metrics we should be looking for? Are there certain sort of models that we should be modeling after? And this investor said, you all are in pre-seed and seed investing. It's the Wild West out there. And you have to go with your gut and what you know about the entrepreneurs. And one of our teams, Lambda Labs, started by two brothers, Stephen and Michael Balaban. It was originally an app called Dreamscope that they made. And their app just, it was doing okay, but it wasn't doing great. And then Prisma came out which is one of those photo sharing apps where you can sort of merge a piece of art, with your photos. So you might have a Picasso in your face, and it, puts them together to make you into a Picasso, which is pretty cool. And they had a lot of users, but again, Prisma came out and really dominated the market in that area. And so the team started thinking about creative ideas of what they could do. And it turned out that they had to make their own deep learning workstation to do the work that they were doing on their app. And they had a second one. And just on a whim, they decided to put it up on Amazon to see if they could sell it. And not only did they sell it, but they sold it for $10,000. They packed it up in their own car and they drove it to where it was going. And now that's the business they're in. They create deep learning workstations and sell them to startups and to research groups. And it's really taken off, and it's been really interesting to watch that happen. So I'm going to pause there on that story, but that story is really about, not following trends, but following founders. And that's one of the key things that we do at 1517. Okay, so got a question. Do you require community startups to have a monetization model clearly right from the start? No, we talk about business models. We want to know that people are thinking about business. But one thing that I like to talk to people about anyways is that when you're doing a startup, there's a lot of experimentation. You're looking at a lot of assumptions and trying to get them out of the way. And sometimes when people are trying to monetize something on top of getting people to use their product, you're doing two experiments. You're doing the experiment of one, will people use, what you have, and two, will people pay the price that you've put out there? And if you get the second one wrong, if you get the price wrong, you don't actually know unless you're getting really great feedback. And it is difficult for people to get really high quality feedback from users. One thing I always recommend is to get on the phone with people. Too often I'll hear startup founders say, oh, I sent out a survey. Not enough. Especially when your startup is really young, you need as much deep feedback as you can get, and you're going to get that through a narrative. People will say a lot more than they write. But anyways, if you're testing a pricing model on top of testing whatever it is you think people want, you're doing two experiments rather than one. So we always tell people, to really focus on what the product is, get people to use it, and then focus on the pricing model later. Of course, when we're evaluating the deal, we want to have some sense that, okay, that there could be pricing models put into play on something, but they certainly don't need to be implemented, just something that's being thought about. So thanks for your question. Feel free to pull in more questions. You all can throw in a whole bunch of questions at once, and then here we go. Excellent. All right, so next question. How can one find a perfect co-founder? Oh geez, that's like asking how does one find the perfect spouse? Don't know that there's such thing as a perfect co-founder. But the thing that we always recommend to people is to really tap the networks that you have. Oftentimes a co-founder is someone you already know. With the founders that we've worked with, usually it's someone that they know from high school or from college, or that they met in some sort of social scenario. It's not necessarily because they went to actually it's almost never because they went to a networking event. So one thing that I always recommend to people is if you're looking for a co-founder and you can't think of people, go through your social media feeds and think this is a friend of mine or someone I know who I'd really love to work with at some point. Because it's a warm lead since you already know them and you have more information. So I say go with people you know. So that's how I'll answer that one. Okay, we got another one here. So, okay, questions about the Thiel Fellowship. You might have come across these questions multiple times, but okay, here they are. Okay, how did you choose the fellows when you were actively involved with the Thiel Fellowship? What do you look for in the candidates? Okay, so let's see. So when I was at the Thiel Fellowship, that was back in 2010. It was very early. To be honest, we really were just flying by the seat of our pants. We were a bit like a startup. We didn't know exactly what we were looking for at the time. But I remember reading through each of the team members. There were 5 of us on the team. Probably each of us took about 100 of the applications each to read. We had about 400 or 500 applications that year. And I remember reading through a whole bunch. I had probably gotten through something like 75 applications. And I finally got to this one application that I just thought stood out above the rest. And that was the application actually of Tom Courier. He is a founder now of a company called Cabin that's actually now in the 15-17 portfolio. So one thing that's true is we love to work with people over time. And hopefully I'll remember to talk more about that, because that also filters into the Thiel Fellowship, because having a relationship with an organization is a great way to get grants and resources from people when they know you a little bit better. But I remember when I was reading Tom's application that he had some past history of execution. He had some crazy ideas. I remember he told this story in his application about even in elementary school, starting to sell products to kids, actually. Like, he had made a cushion that you could sit on at your chair. And if you were fidgety, you could sort of fidget on this cushion that he made. And I remember thinking, like, okay, obviously we're not interested in funding cushions. But I love that there was that past history there, and that he'd been thinking about these things for a long time. And he seemed to be really interested in solving problems. And he definitely had that insatiable curiosity that I talked about earlier, as did all of the Thiel Fellows. They had that drive to explore a topic really, really deeply, and also just for fun. So yeah, those are some of the traits that we look for. And one piece of advice that I would tell you is to really try to build relationships with organizations that you'd like to work with in the future early. Don't necessarily wait until you have, I don't know, everything sorted out. With 15-17, we are very open. We mentor people, we give people grants, we work with people on capital partnership as well. And we do a lot of one-off conversations and help and advice. So you can always reach out to us. And for 15-17, you can reach me at Danielle at 1517fund.com. And we're really accessible over there. With the Thiel Fellowship today, things have changed a little bit. The age has gone up. It used to be 19 and under, and I believe it's 22 and under now. A great candidate today looks different than a great candidate back then. Because the age has gone up, and because young entrepreneurship has really taken off in a big way, people can sort of wait a little bit longer. The fellowship can sort of, look at people who've maybe developed what they're doing a little bit more. When myself and Michael Gibson were on the team, we were looking really, really early. I mean, people just had ideas. But now candidates who are coming in, some of them even have seed funding already. But I still recommend applying early. All right, let's see, got some more questions here. So, Harshit is asking about Innovations Academy, the Thiel Fellowship, 15-17, all being centered around unconventional ways of educating oneself. What are your thoughts on the current education system and how the unschooling and learning over the internet will transform or shake the whole scenario? Gosh, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of thoughts I have about that. Well, I think things are moving and they're progressing, and families are thinking about education differently. When we started the Thiel Fellowship in 2010, nobody was talking about the education bubble. People weren't talking about the cost or the time of college that was too much for students. And now people are talking about it, and they're talking about it regularly. And that was our goal with the Thiel Fellowship, was to make that a everyday conversation for people. And it really, really is. So I think things have moved along that way. In regards to Innovations Academy, we started that in 2006 and opened it in 2008. I was principal there for 2 years. I was probably one of the youngest principals on record, but I was not into the whole 30 under 30 thing or that sort of thing. I was heads down working, which is what all of you should be doing. Stop going out and getting press and media and just do the work. People will recognize you at some point later, and that's okay. But we have a very strong social emotional curriculum. And when we started our program, people thought it was kind of crazy. We don't use typical rewards or punishments. All staff there is on a first name basis. I was principal and I was just Danielle. I wasn't Miss Danielle. I wasn't Miss Strachman. And now this is becoming more common. It's not as crazy anymore. And so we love to see that things are progressing over time. they're not progressing necessarily quickly, but I also wouldn't expect them to, because changing entire systems is very, very difficult. I think more people are homeschooling now. I don't have stats on this, but certainly more people know about it. They know that it's not just for very religious families. I mean, certainly, all kinds of families homeschool at this point. So I think some of the stigma behind it is dropping and lessening a little bit. And let me make sure I've sort of answered this whole question here. I think one thing people are starting to grasp more of is that MOOCs are not necessarily changing the conversation like people thought. It's amazing to get, a massive amount of students on a course online, and it has certainly shaped things going forward, but I think people really are understanding the value of that relationship between student and teacher and peers, and thinking more about building that into curriculums and new school forms. There's also the micro school movement, which is schools that, can have between 10 and 50 students or so. I sometimes have qualms with that movement just because it does tend to be, private school centered. And I don't have a problem with private schools, but the hard part is the question of scale. How do we scale private schools to be so that public students can have access to them? So there's lots going on. It's moving. I would love it if it were moving faster. And I know a lot of people in this group are super passionate about education. So yeah, keep at it. All right, wow, a lot of questions coming. This is great. So Philip is asking, when you're in the grind of just getting product built and reaching out to customers, how do you keep momentum through the highs and lows? What strategies would you recommend a founder to employ to keep your team on track and moving quickly? Good question. Let's see. I mean, I guess one of the things is, there's a quote, and I always get it a little bit wrong, but it's something like, don't let the great be the enemy of the good, something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is. But sometimes we'll see people wait a little bit too long before they're willing to put something, out to their customers and get feedback on it. And I get it. Like, we all want something that's polished and looks great. But sometimes putting something out early before it's exactly where you want it to be is really important, because actually it's an iterative process. Your customers are going to be building the product alongside of you, because they have a lot of feedback of what they want and where they want it to go. Of course, you as a mission-oriented leader have to think about, is this where I want my product to go? And it's not just iterating either on the product itself, it's iterating on the business model. It's iterating on, design choices, things like that. So sometimes you can piece things out and say, hey, we're sticking to what our product is. We're not changing this, but we're hearing feedback from customers about the business plan we have, or maybe they want the design a little bit differently, but the core of what we do, like, we're sticking to that for sure. But really talk to your customers a lot. And I said this earlier, but I'll say it again in case people didn't hear it. Talk to them on the phone. I know it's an old school concept, but you get more information from people. It would be like if I said to people, hey, just write me emails and I'll answer emails for you. It's really different to get to know someone personally. Everyone is way more dynamic when you get them in a higher bandwidth medium, whether that's phone or video. Talk to them frequently. And their like or love of the product will really drive you to keep going forward. And make sure to deliver that information back to the team, or record the call you have so the team can hear how much somebody loves what they're doing. Sometimes for people where the cycle between having a customer and what you're doing is really long, like for example with nonprofits, this is true. I always tell people to take pictures of your potential users or the people that you're going to be serving and put them on a wall somewhere so you can see them, and keep them in mind that the reason that you're doing this is to solve a problem and to work with people largely, and to make things better or easier or faster. And the more you can visually represent that, I think the more we can keep it in mind as we're going about sort of like the hard knocks of what we're doing. All right, got a whole bunch more questions here. Okay, so for people who have to serve mandatory military service, could there be an exception made for the Thiel Fellowship age requirement? I had to serve 2 years of mandatory military service before college, and I'm now 24. So I don't know what the Thiel Fellowship stance on this is now. When I was at the program, we just had to sort of say, hey, it's 19 and under. But I don't know what the program is doing now, so I would look on their website, see if they have any sort of question and answer about that. And in addition, if they don't say anything there, you might reach out. But yeah, I sadly don't know. I think it would be nice if people had, some wiggle room on that because, serving, especially if it is conscription based where you have to do it and it's not a choice, that's a state of affairs that we don't want to punish anybody for. But yeah, I don't know what the program does now. All right. Oh man, people ask me about books. I gotta be honest. So we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Reading is not a huge strength of mine. I wish I were better at it. I started to read late as a kid. And when I read, I get really fatigued, to the point where I'll fall asleep. I'll be reading 2 pages of a book and I will just start falling asleep. So how have I made up for this? One, Michael is an amazing reader. He probably reads, I don't know, at least a book a week, maybe more. I seem to be getting lots of likes for not reading, but I do wish I could sort of do more of that physically at least. But Michael is an amazing reader. He is just voracious. I'm very lucky to have him as a colleague. I'm trying to think if there are any books that stand out in general, not just from 2017, since I know I didn't read nearly as much as I wanted to last year. One book, there's a couple of books I always recommend to people. One is called The Power of Habit. I really think that, your life starts with you and what you do and habits that you've created. And then what you create is based on a force multiplier of those habits that you've built. And so if you are able to be sort of really regimented and figure out what works for you, then you can scale that and figure out what would work in a larger way with a group of people, with a company, with a nonprofit that you're starting. So that's one of my favorites. Really love that book. The other book that I really love is written by Benjamin Zander. It's called The Art of Possibility. It's another book about leadership. And it's really about how do you look at scenarios, not necessarily in the same old way. There's this great example in the book, whole chapter. It's called Giving Yourself an A. And it's actually an exercise that I used to have the Thiel Fellows do. And sometimes I'll ask our portfolio companies to do as well, where what you're doing is saying, hey, so Ben Zander, to give some background, he's actually a conductor for the New England Philharmonic. He might be retired at this point, but he was also a professor. And in his classes, he would say to people, hey, if you were going to get an A in this class, I want you to write yourself a letter from, the next semester saying how you got your A in this class. And so people would really share intimately about what their struggles were and what they would do to overcome those struggles. And those would be the things that their classes were based on, which I thought was really unique. And so when I was working with the Thiel Fellows, the first exercise we did was this Giving Yourself an A letter, and people would describe out, what it was, what were the challenges they were going to face and overcome, and try to have those reflective capabilities. So I think any kind of reading that helps make you be a better person or a better manager or gives you technical skills and things like that, it really starts there. Of course, it's wonderful to read about all kinds of things. If you ask me what one of my favorite books is, it's called His Dark Materials Trilogy. It's a fantasy book, which is a lot of fun. Great characters. I think we gain a lot of empathy skills from reading fiction. So yeah, there you go. There's some books. But if you get Michael on here, ask him what he's reading, because oh man, he could go on for the whole hour about that. All right, next question. Is it necessary that we decide the stake of co-founders in the beginning itself? Or let the startup start, and once it reaches a certain level, you decide upon the stake based on each of their contributions? The reason I ask this is if you try getting into stake and those things in the beginning itself, you may put it off with certain people and their possible contributions. In the end, 20% of zero is zero. Your views on this? Yeah, I do agree. 20% of zero is zero. I'm just taking in your question on the second read here. Yeah, I do think it's important to talk about equity stakes early on in the process. It's A lot of questions, the answer is it depends, and this is one of those questions. So, okay, if this were the scenario, if it were two people who've worked together before, or friends who've known each other for years and know that they have good skill sets and can complement each other, I would say yes, definitely set up those equity splits early. One thing you want to set up, though, is you want to set up a cliff for vesting and a vesting schedule as well, so nobody's equity vests all at once. It's important that people are incentivized, and things change, like people leave companies. Sometimes working together doesn't work out, and you want to make sure that someone doesn't leave with half of a company, after 6 months of work. So it is important to talk about early. I think it's also important to talk about early because you might have two co-founders thinking, oh, I'm going to get 50%, they're going to get 50%. But one of the other co-founders is thinking, oh, I'm going to get 80% and they're going to get 20%. And then, months down the line, after you all have put in work, time, energy, sleepless nights, you've given up time with friends and hobbies and all of that. And then it's time to do the docs and someone brings up, oh yeah, no, because this was my initial idea, and you came on 2 weeks later, I thought I'd have 80%. And I've seen conversations like that, and I think that's crazy. That's not a good way to build a relationship with a co-founder. But it also really depends. Sometimes you'll have someone come on who you'll think is an employee during that first year, or you'll first think of as an employee. And to me, a definition of an employee is someone that you're managing. It's not somebody, someone who's probably giving like strategic help and advice, but it's someone that you're sort of needing to keep on top of the workload on. A co-founder is someone who's really in the trenches with you. They're providing a lot of strategy. They don't need a lot of direction in terms of guidance from somebody else on, hey, how should I be spending my time today? But you might find that someone that you're taking on who you originally thought of as an employee is actually a great co-founder. Maybe they didn't think of the initial product idea, but maybe they've iterated a lot on the business, or maybe their design skills are really just making the product. So I don't think co-foundership is just about, were you there at the inception of the idea, but are you adding value that is at the co-founder level? So I think it's important to talk about early. I think it's important to set expectations. When you're onboarding an employee, it's important to talk about what their package is going to be. But if you see that someone is performing really well, you should renegotiate that and talk about co-founder status. So I'll leave that at that. Let's see, more questions. Let's see, what tips, best practices, and experiences do you have to share on growing and managing a global community of learners? We catalyzed AI Saturdays in 90 plus cities around the world. Wow. Empowering people to use free open source materials to learn AI, but it is hard to manage quality of the meetups globally. Yeah, gosh. Well, first off, wow, kudos to you, hats off. That is hard. So I really admire what you're doing. I'm not sure if I have any particularly great insights there. I haven't managed a community, I think, as big as yours. We've tried a lot. When I was at the Thiel Foundation, we tried to launch sort of citywide Thiel Fellowships, summit groups. With 1517, we have sort of an ambassador program we're running. But it's tough. It's hard to engage volunteers consistently. So I'm going to say somebody else in this group who's probably listening right now knows a lot more about this and has more ideas for you likely than I do. So I'm going to say, hey, get in touch directly and see if someone else can jump in there to help out. I'm always a fan of saying, hey, I don't know. I'm not going to BS my way through an answer. I could surely think of ideas here for you, but they wouldn't be from experience. It would just be, I don't know, thinking of it off the top of my head. So someone else asks, as a startup, we have always been running behind our schedule in terms of our product development relative to our projected roadmap. Yep, seen it a lot. Can you point out some external risks that we may face when our product release is delayed than the projected timeline? Well, so there's a bunch of different things that happen there. One is like, it depends on if your timeline has been communicated to your users. So if there's a bunch of people who've been expecting it to come and it keeps not coming, that can get people, to be sort of, I don't know, like upset with just sort of how things are going and what's going on. But it depends on if you've told them that at all. If you haven't told anyone anything on that, then it's not too bad. But of course, the more delayed your product is, the longer it will take to get feedback. And the longer it takes to get feedback, usually the longer it takes to get more data. And the longer it takes more data, the longer it takes to fundraise from the next batch of people that you want to fundraise from. So it just sort of pushes everything back. So then, of course, as everything gets pushed back that way, your run rate keeps getting smaller and smaller. So that's really, I think, the hardest thing there. Part of that question is, can you share some light on this regard, particularly for hardware startups? Oh man, yeah, hardware has that word hard in it, and it certainly is. We've definitely seen a lot of delays for hardware startups. Although things are getting better in that regard, there are more accelerators for them to go into. There are more resources in general. I'm trying to think anything that's like in particular for hardware startups. What I've been telling hardware startups is if you're in a position to raise money, raise more than you think that you need. I don't have a good mathematical model for you on this per se right off the bat. People will have like, this is the amount we need, this is the amount of wiggle room, and then there's some like extra number you should multiply there. I don't know if it's like 1.5 or an extra half or what. I don't think it's as much as double, because then people will start to say like, well, what do you need that money for? But you definitely want to give yourself some buffer there, because things do take longer in that domain. It is harder to release a hardware project than a software product. It's harder to iterate. Everything takes more time than you think it will. So yeah, that's my advice on that one. Looks like we've gone to the bottom of these questions so far. Happy to answer more questions. I'll give it a minute to see what people say. I guess as context also, this is not the 1517 office, this is my house. I keep noticing that like my plants are showing behind me. I love plants. Big fan. That's an orchid back there. Orchids are kind of weird. They like to grow in very strange pots where the roots are just falling out of them. So that's a good thing for it. I guess that's one thing about me, is I love to see things grow and change. And that's true for startups. That's true for plants. Just all of it. I used to grow up in fixer-upper houses, and so I love to be able to see something go from being sort of like, I don't know, like an example is I grew up in this one fixer-upper house that used to be a frat house, and my mom decided it would be a great project to do. And I remember being about 10 years old, sitting on the floor, digging up staples from the floor and pulling up the carpet, and the carpet was soaked with beer underneath, like the padding layer, which is really crazy. But underneath were really amazing wood floors, and we shined them all up, and the house was really beautiful afterwards. And I like to think about startups in the same way, where like you have this idea, it needs to be shined up and figured out, but you might have something really beautiful after you work on it and put in that time and energy. I'm going to see if Harshit has sent me. Nope, I'm doing good. No messages over here saying, oh no, we lost you. Okay, got a question from Harshit. Okay, nope, got another question here. Does 1517 fund the social enterprises? So one thing that I like to think about is that our capital should be making a dent in the universe. It depends on what your definition of a social enterprise is, but a lot of our companies have a mission. It's not just about, it is about being a business, but it's about having a mission as well. So I would say that like in that vein, like we do, fund things that have like a social good mentality, but I think our definition of social good is actually quite a bit broader. So we don't call ourselves a social good fund, but we hear, lots of pitches that would benefit lots of people, and that's of high interest to us. To give a little bit more color on how we do investing, I've mentioned first that we work with people in a number of ways. One is mentorship. We answer lots of questions from people. We take phone calls all the time. We just try to help where we can. The next is that we have a grant program that we run. It's very opportunistic. There's no real application for it. But when we talk to people and we find out, hey, like this person has something that's kind of interesting. I had a young person come up to me at a hackathon who wanted to build a sensor to go on a fuse box so that people could monitor their home energy consumption. And they had a idea for how they'd get started with it. So we gave them $1,000 to get started on that. That's just a Venmo payment. There's no paperwork with us. We don't own any equity or anything like that. And that has turned into a whole business actually called Amper. Those sensors now, instead of going on home fuse boxes, actually go on machines in manufacturing plants to monitor their energy consumption. And so really interesting for us to watch that pivot over time. That goes back to working with people over time. So we knew that founder for about 1.5 years before making an investment, but they also didn't need an investment for a long time. We do pre-seed funding mostly. At least in Silicon Valley, that's like around the $250K stage. We usually come in at something like a $500K, $2 million round. And we also have reserves for follow-on capital. And when we're investing $250K, we are usually looking for people to be going into some form of a pilot so that they have some form of a product that they're ready to deploy with a couple of potential customers to do some more market validation. Okay. Harshit asks, let's see, 1517 invests in startups at seed stage mostly, yep. And sometimes now we're calling it pre-seed because seed is actually usually at like the $2 to $3 million raise. We're a bit lower than that at this point, so usually under 1 million. What are the signs or stages you feel that a startup to invest in as far as your experience? Is it proof of concept, a good team to go full product development and business model? So good team, that's a must. You need to have the expertise, or at least some of them, to get started. When we see people who are outsourcing a lot of the work to other people, that's when we start getting a little bit worried about the team having the competency that's needed. So team is really important. Some validation of product is important. So when people say, oh, I haven't talked to any customers yet, that's the first thing I tell them to do is like go back out there and work with people. As far as business plan, not necessary this early. I mean, some idea that what you're doing could have a monetary component is important. Like we are in the business of scaling businesses, but you don't need to have a rigid way of how that would look because we know that's going to change over time. Let's see, what are the difficulties a teenager founder who has never worked professionally could face in a B2B SaaS market? Probably lots of them. Although what's interesting to us is that, we've gone to pitch competitions that have people who have a lot more life experience than a teenager would, who have worked for companies and things like that. And I think a lot of them still have some of the same problems. So sometimes it's hard for us to know what is like a particular issue for someone who's in their teens versus someone who's a bit older. But I do think that, some of the difficulties are actually team oriented a lot. We get a lot of questions at 1517 about management and how to manage teams because a lot of the people we've worked with have had limited exposure to managing other people or being managed themselves. I think one of the best ways that you learn to become a good manager is by having had good managers in the past, because then you have examples for like, this is what good management looks like. This is what, not so good neutral management looks like. And over here, this is what bad management looks like. And that's really difficult if like you've never had a job before. You can certainly read books about it. We always recommend if you have role models to read about those role models. Of course, not everybody's role models are good at everything, so you have to sort of cast a wide net there. But yeah, we see for younger founders that like team is tough. I guess another thing that's tough, especially in B2B, is that you need businesses to take you seriously, and sometimes that's hard. When I was on the Thiel Fellowship team, we had someone who walked into a meeting to try to sell a product they had. the executive walked into the meeting, looked at the Thiel Fellow, I think he was 17 at the time, laughed and said, "I can't possibly buy a product from you," and walked out of the room. And that was the meeting. It was done. So that was tough. So we always recommend, you have to get a group behind you to bolster up what you don't have. And as a teenager, what you don't have is experience, at least one thing that you don't have. So I recommend going out and finding advisors and people who can help you, people who can give credibility to what you're doing because they've worked in the space for a long time, because they believe in what you're doing. So get that advisory board set up. Hopefully they can give you some contacts, for your product. They can be a potential good sales lead and so on. I'm trying to think of anything else in particular. And while I'm thinking of answers, people can start adding in more questions because I think we're getting down to the bottom of the stack here. I'm trying to think any other difficulties for younger founders in general. I guess this isn't really talking specifically about B2B, SaaS models. And I think people are maybe just bad at this overall. I don't think this is particularly to young people, but it's asking for help. As I've gotten older, I know what I don't know, and I'm very comfortable telling people hey, I don't know. I don't know how you should scale a global community. Like I said to one of the commenters earlier, there is that adage, fake it till you make it. And that certainly has also served me well. But I also know that it's important to say when you need help on something, when you need support. And I think that it can be very popular, maybe amongst younger entrepreneurs in particular, to make everything sound like it's going really well all the time. One thing I'm constantly advising people on is to ask for what you want. My favorite quote is, if you don't ask, you don't get. I don't always take this advice so well, which has been pointed out to me. So I guess I have to ask for more things. But yeah, I'll see people put out their weekly or monthly update saying, hey, here's how things are going. And they don't have an ask section. They're not saying, hey, here's what I need. So I think founders in general could be better about saying, hey, here's what I need. Because the people around you have a lot of resources that you should be able to tap into. Okay, next question. Do you fund startups from India? If yes, then is incorporation in US a must? So far 1517 has only funded things that are in North America, or that they have a home base in North America. Part of that is just that we're a team of 3 people. We don't have a lot of time to assess global markets. It's hard for us to sort of understand things, coming from a whole different country, because then you have to understand the economics, the social culture, all kinds of variables that we don't understand. And even if we read up on them, it's different to have a visceral experience of something than to read about it. So we have not done that. I'm trying to think if there's any advice I would give you being in India. I think incorporation in the US can be helpful, but it depends on who you're working with. I don't know what funding structures are like there in India. So sadly, I can't point to any particular advice that's really salient to where you are, because I don't understand the market and how it works there enough. Okay. I just got an article about orchids. That's pretty amazing. Let me see. Oh, okay, got it. Okay, that's someone commenting about talking early with their co-founder. That's awesome. Great. Thanks for the orchid article. That's awesome. Okay, another question. What was your career path? How did you get into venture capital? Albeit you didn't have a professional degree or career around it. No, I don't. How to identify one's passion, asking to seeing you as a role model for self-learner exploring her way towards the career aligned with her passion. Great question. Got to take a sip of tea here. Yeah, Oh God, I could never have imagined that I would be in venture capital. I actually still have a hard time even calling myself a VC because I don't know, I don't like a lot of the reputation of the venture capital community. Um, so when people ask me what I do, I'll just tell them like, oh, I work with startups. Like I help them, I support startups. I don't necessarily say like, oh, I'm an investor or I'm in VC, but I do have a weird career path. I did go to college. It was the right choice for me, and that's kind of our stance about school. Is like it's the right choice for some people, and it's not the right choice for others. Um, when I went to school, I also came out with a very, very small amount of debt. And I went and I got a degree in performance music and psychology, and I was specializing in neuropsychology. So I had no idea that I would be working in finance later in life. Trying to think how to make my career path kind of short. I guess like the very short story is that one, I was headed towards grad school and I decided to not do that. I was going to go and get a PsyD in neuropsychology and work in that. I decided that I didn't want to spend another 7 years in school, and I kind of had an early 20s life crisis, and I up and moved to San Diego. I was from Boston. I had a boyfriend who lived in San Diego. I up and moved to San Diego to be with my then partner, and I started a tutoring business because I always loved working with young people. My joke about this is that young people for me will always shift. You know, when I was 20, a young person was 14. You know, now a young person for me is 20. And I think when I'm 60, a young person for me will be when I'm a young person will be 40 when I'm in my 60s. So who knows what will happen in the future. But I started that tutoring business, which led me to starting to work with homeschoolers, which really changed my life. It opened my eyes to a whole other way of educating people. And I had a sense that it could look really different. I didn't know how different it could look, and that community really showed me how. From there, a colleague of mine and I from a homeschooling co-op, we started Innovations Academy, which is a school to help scale what we were doing in homeschooling. It's based on project-based learning and relationship-based teaching. We started with 160 students our very first year. I had never run an organization before. My co-founder and I from that, we used to have this quote. We would look at each other and say, hey, like who allowed that? Like who allowed us to run this school? We have 160 students. We probably have about 200 more parents that we work with. We had a staff of 14 people. Neither one of us had run an organization before, so we were just flying by the seat of our pants and learning as we were going and making all of these crazy mistakes. Now the school serves 400 people. It's been in existence for about 10 years, and I'm really proud of where it's been and where it's going. From there, I moved up to San Francisco for yet another boyfriend. I have moved for love many times, and could probably give a whole talk about that, but that's a whole different topic. But moved up to San Francisco, and someone called me and said, hey, like the Thiel Foundation needs people on the Thiel Fellowship. We think you'd be a perfect fit. It was a friend of mine who worked over there. I had assumed they had all of the people that they needed and wanted already. Turns out they didn't. So I joined them over there. We launched that program that had all kinds of ups and downs. We learned so much our first year, especially about working with people over time. I think we were too sort of focused on sort of like college acceptance accomplishments to start. Like we were looking at, grade point average and SATs and, how many fives did people have on their SAT 2s and things like that. And those just not very relevant at all. So we started looking at like, what have people done in the past and what do they want to do? And let's start making friends with them now so that when they're ready to go, that we've known them for a while. But yeah, so it was at the Thiel Fellowship, and then my colleague Michael and I, he was over there at the Thiel Fellowship with me. After the first 5 years, we were sort of looking at the outcomes of Thiel Fellows, and we noticed that a number of them had outperforming companies that were moving towards Series A and B and beyond. And we said, gosh, like there's really a way to scale this, and we think it would be through a venture capital model. So we got started. We had our thesis, and we were very strong in our thesis. We knew how to work with young people. We knew how to go out and find them. We didn't know how venture capital worked, so we have advisors that we work with We have one advisor we meet with every month, and I call her the Oracle. She sits down with us and she always tells us like what are the things we need to sort of be looking ahead at, and helps us reflect on what we've done in the past. And she's great. So really just building up people around me, who are able to give, knowledge, is part of how I've learned. And part of it is just through experience. I'm a better general partner now than when we started 2.5 years ago, because now I know what the job is like because I've been in it for a while. There's a book that I read when I was in my early 20s that really helped me get on sort of always being able to create my own career path. I've been self-employed for much of my life, and the book is called Zen and the Art of Making a Living. It really helped me to see that you don't necessarily need a degree to do what you're doing. When I started my tutoring business, the reason that started was because I wanted to work with children, in sort of like a professional capacity, but I also didn't want to have to spend 7 more years in school to be able to work with them as a psychologist. So instead I worked with them as a tutor, but, I would take different psychological principles or sort of activities that I had learned and integrate them into the tutoring sessions. And it was really powerful. I worked really well with students who had anxiety and OCD and things like that. And so there were ways to circumnavigate having a degree to working with that, what would have been a patient population instead became a student population. So yeah, I don't know, my whole way of being and doing things has been to sort of just jump in and get started and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Hard work is something that, I've always had to do in life. I think I talked earlier about not being a great reader. So I had to work really, really hard as a kid to sort of keep up in school and in class. And that hard work has served me well because it's been able to get me to say okay, here's the next low hanging fruit. Okay, we have one person who believes in our fund. Now let's go talk to other people who believe in our fund. It's also about telling people what you don't know and about what you need. When we were fundraising, we went out to people and told them hey, we're fundraising for a fund. Do you know people who would be willing to help us? Can you help advise us and so on? So yeah, a lot of it is just going out there, being vulnerable, putting yourself out there, and seeing what happens. So I hope that answers your question, maybe even super fully. I think we have a few minutes left here. So I'm happy to take a couple closing questions. I guess a couple things, how to reach me. I've given you all my email. It's Danielle@1517fund.com. Check out our website too for more information. We have a Medium account for 1517. We just started an Instagram account, so we can do Insta stories on there, which have been kind of fun. I don't know how much we'll keep up with that, but maybe if we get some good positive feedback, we'll do it. Additionally, also look me up on LinkedIn under Danielle Strachman, and happy to connect there as well. And yeah, okay. Harshit is just saying that we have time for a question or two. But yeah, those are ways to reach out, and happy to answer any last questions. I guess we can give it a minute and see what people ask. And if people don't have questions, of course, we can always end early. This is very funny to me that I'm oh, I have a big D on my mug. It's a little bit embarrassing, but a friend of mine's mother gave this to me, and I absolutely love this mug. But I'm not so egotistical to run around wanting my initial of my first name all on a video chat. I just wasn't thinking about it this morning when I picked it out. Okay, last question's going once, going twice. Anybody else? I bet somebody has a question that they wanted to ask. And if you have questions you want to ask, that you don't want to put here, you can always email me, or shoot me a private message on Facebook, and we can go from there too. Harshit, you let me know if you want me to wrap this up and just be all right, we're good, because it doesn't look like people have more questions right now. All right, I'm going to take the lack of questions right now as we're done. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'm off to go drive to Santa Cruz, about an hour and a half away from here, to go meet with a potential portfolio company. So I'm going to do that, and yeah, someone's asked me for what the titles of those books were. There's more questions coming in. I wonder if there's a delay on that. All right, I'll go ahead and answer these. So one person asked, what is that book? Please say it again. So one book is The Power of Habit. The other book is The Art of Possibility. And the book that I just mentioned that actually really changed my life in my early 20s is called Zen and the Art of Making a Living. All fantastic books. Okay, and Harshit asks, okay, we'll leave this as a closer. What are some of the skills that you feel you should have developed in your 20s? Well, I think what I would recommend for people now would probably be different than what I would have recommended for myself when I was in my 20s. But I definitely recommend that people, along with studying, if you're in school, studying the humanities is great, but I also think coming out with a hard technical skill is also really important right now. Yeah, I think there are different sort of mind styles that come into play when you learn technical skills versus when you learn the humanities. And so I recommend a balance of both if you're in school. If you're not in school, I recommend self-learning. Read, listen to podcasts. As someone who has a hard time reading, podcasts are very helpful for me. I guess other skills, a skill that I developed a lot in my 20s that has served me so much over time is actually communication skills. I'm a big proponent of something called nonviolent communication. It was started in the 1970s by a man named Marshall Rosenberg. It's all about conflict resolution, but it's really just about communicating with people. I use NVC, that's like the acronym for it. I use NVC skills all the time when working with founders, in my personal relationships, even with business negotiations, because nonviolent communication is all about understanding another person's needs, and how to sort of service those needs for another person. So it's really interesting. I could talk all about combining communication skills and business skills. I think people don't think about this enough. I think a lot of us think that, we grow up learning to communicate and say words, but how you say words is actually really, really important. So yeah, spent a lot of time on that. And one of the best things that I did in my early 20s was actually as I was on a speech and debate team. Many people have a fear of public speaking. I was included in that. I have less of a fear of public speaking now from going out and doing speech and debate. I did Lincoln Douglas debate in particular, which really teaches you how to study something and do deep research in an area, as well as also how to organize your thoughts, how to debate, how to understand argumentation. Whenever I'm going through a pitch deck, all the things that I learned in speech and debate come back to me in an instant. When someone makes a claim in a pitch deck, on slide 3, I always ask, is that true? That's one of the questions that we always learned doing speech and debate. And so if you're in a school or college setting that has speech and debate, go do it. It will serve you for the rest of your life in ways that you can't even imagine. I had no idea that it would help me so much. And then I guess the last thing I would say is that, especially in your 20s, practice doing things that are outside of your comfort zone, because it will make you better at doing things that are hard for you. I did political campaigning for a friend of mine when I must have been 19 at the time. And it was terrifying for me. I had to go door to door and get wet signatures from people on paper to let a friend of mine become on the ballot for a district role in Massachusetts. And it was scary, just going up to strangers' doors all the time. So I always recommend trying to do things that are hard for you, that you wouldn't expect of yourself, because you'll surprise yourself and you'll build up that resilience to doing things that are difficult. So go, look up rejection therapy. It's an interesting method. It's all about learning how to ask for things and take rejection gracefully. And sometimes you get what you want when you ask. So I'll leave our conversation at that today, but you all know where to reach me. Yeah, have a great day. Thanks for having me. Bye.